Hello and welcome back to the channel. Now, what if you could mount an Amazon S3 bucket like it's a local drive and stop dealing with API calls, SDKs, and all that extra code? No more get object, no more copying files locally. Just open, read, and write like it's a normal disk.
So, is that worth something to you? Or should I just punch up clear?
No.
And that's where Amazon S3 Files comes into play. This is a brand new feature of the S3 service that allows you to create mount points on your Linux operating system so you can interact with the Amazon S3 bucket using your standard file operations. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to set this up. So let's get started. Now, Amazon S3 is an object storage solution that allows you to store virtually unlimited amount of data in the cloud. It abstracts away the underlying block storage volumes, so it presents to you basically a flat file architecture where you can store any amount of data, any type of file or object, and uses a system of a key value pair where the key represents the name of the object and the value is the data that's held in binary. Amazon S3 also allows you to store vast amounts of metadata for every object, allowing you to add some analytics and to be able to use that metadata to understand the actual objects that you've stored in the platform. In addition to that, it also uses prefixes and delimiters. These are used to separate out and categorize your data and ultimately give a feeling of a hierarchical architecture. However, there is no file system available on the S3 platform. And so when it comes to interacting with data that's held in S3, especially if you're doing it from a compute service like a Linux operating system, you need to use API calls to get objects and to put objects into the S3 platform. And so let's take an example of an EC2 instance and an application running on the EC2 instance. Now, in order to interact with the data that's held in S3, you could use the SDKs and use a programming language like Python to write code to be able to get and put objects into the S3 bucket. You can also use the command line interface where you would issue commands or S3 API requests in order to access the data. And you can also use standard HTTPS protocols, such as, for example, in this case, we've got a curl command to retrieve data over a web interface. So why is this an issue? Well, every request for every object that you make in S3 needs to go through that API call process. So authentication, network round trips, metadata handling, and so on and so forth. What you couldn't do was access the S3 platform using a standard file system such as NTFS, for example. That just wasn't possible. And what this means is that you can't perform standard file operations. You couldn't simply open a file and edit it. You had to actually get object. Now, this is a problem, especially if you're dealing with really large files. Imagine tens of thousands of files and you're performing random read-write operations against those files. Because you have to make those individual API calls, which has all of that round trip happening to it with the authentication and the network back and forth, it slows the entire process down. And so ultimately, Amazon S3 has a higher latency than traditional file system, especially for small, frequent file operations, because it is accessed via API calls rather than standard file operations. And so previously, if you wanted to work with lots of small files, then the recommended approach would be to use a file system like Amazon EFS. And specifically, if you wanted to share data across your EC2 instances and you needed a file system solution to share data between those instances, EFS was perfect for it. If you're using Windows, you can use something like Amazon FSx for Windows File Server that is designed specifically for your Windows-based instances. And so as an example here, we can have two Linux instances that would basically connect to the EFS system through what are known as mount points or mount targets that connect to a file system that you would create on the EFS platform where the data would be held. Now, EFS provides you with full POSIX support. So POSIX stands for Portable Operating System Interface, and it has lots of key features. So it allows you to perform all of your file operations like open, read, and write, allows you to define file permissions like all of your read, write, and execute permissions. You have a directory structure, which is what your operating system are particularly used to. And you have file locking and consistency capability. One of the biggest downsides of using Amazon EFS, however, is that it's extremely expensive at scale, and many teams end up using it just to bridge the gap to Amazon S3. And so what I'd like to do next is introduce you to the new Amazon S3 Files service. This is an absolute game changer. It's something we've been waiting on for years from AWS. So Amazon S3 Files is a shared file system layer on top of Amazon S3, and it allows services like EC2 Instances to access S3 data as files using standard file system operations. So you've got file and directory access, low latency reads, and native tools that your applications already use. Let's take a look at an architecture diagram to see exactly how this works. So we've got our region within which we've got our VPC, because the VPC is where you're going to host all of your EC2 instances that are going to connect to that file system. And you've got obviously S3 where you're hosting your S3 buckets. So within S3, you're going to build a file system, an S3 files file system, and link it to a general purpose bucket. You can also link it to a specific prefix within the bucket if you wish. In the VPC, you've got your EC2 instances where you're going to create mount targets that's going to point to that file system. Now, the S3 file service presents a traversable view of the S3 objects as files to the resources in your VPC via those mount targets. Ultimately, what this means is that when you're reading data from the S3 bucket, okay, that data is basically placed into the high performing storage of what is S3 files, and then that's accessible through those mount points. Equally, when you're writing data back to S3, you're writing the data to the S3 files file system, which is then synchronized back to the Amazon S3 bucket. When it comes to actually configuring and setting all of this up, there's a few things that you need to be aware of. So you need to ensure that the actual S3 bucket that's going to have that file system associated with it has been enabled for versioning. Versioning is required in order to set all of this up. In addition to that, you'll also need to create security groups within that VPC to ensure that you have the right set of ports and protocols open so that we can connect to the actual mount target, and the mount target can obviously receive data and traffic from the EC2 instances. So I've got a table over there to explain the exact specific protocols and ports that you need to open up. In addition to that, you're also going to need IAM roles. Specifically, a role is required so that S3 files can talk to the S3 bucket that you are linking it with. And in addition to that, you want to ensure that you have an IAM role to allow the instances that you're deploying to connect to the S3 bucket as well to perform certain read operations. Next, in terms of exactly how data is going to traverse this VPC and get into S3, because obviously we're in a VPC configuration, you can obviously use the Internet Gateway, you can use NAT Gateway, and if you want a complete private connection from your VPC to the S3 platform, you can obviously use VPC endpoints for that as well. Something to be aware of, and that is S3 files uses smart caching. So for small files, by default, anything under 128 kilobytes, this is the default. You can change it. S3 files copies them to the fast storage layer. So the next time you read them, it's low latency and quick. For larger files, it doesn't copy them. It just streams the data directly from S3 because S3 is optimized for high throughput. Now, there's something I want you to be aware of. Amazon S3 files is not replacing EFS. It's still S3 underneath. So EFS still has its place for low latency, write heavy workloads, and particularly useful when you have multiple EC2 instances sharing small files with each other. But for data analytics and large scale storage, this is an absolute game changer. Next, what I'd like to do is give you a demonstration as to how you can set this up so we can see this in the console and we can launch an EC2 instance and connect to an Amazon S3 bucket using S3 files. Let's do that next. Okay, so this is my AWS management account. This is in the North Virginia region. And the first thing that I want to do is create an Amazon S3 bucket that's going to be used with S3 files. So we're going to create a general purpose bucket. I'm going to click create bucket and I'm going to call this one BB accounts. Okay, and scroll a little bit further down and then enable bucket versioning as well, because you need versioning for this to work, and then go ahead and click create bucket. Okay, so that's my bucket created. I'm also going to create a couple of folders in this bucket, or prefixes, that's going to then be represented as folders in our file system hierarchy. So I'm going to click create a folder, and here I'm going to go to name, let's just call this one sales. And I'm going to create another folder and call this one purchases. Okay, sales and purchases for BB accounts. Okay, and then you will notice that there's a new tab. It's called the file system tab. So we'll click on that. And here I'm going to go ahead and create a file system. Now, I'm going to create this file system in the default VPC. You can select any of your other VPCs that you have here, but because obviously I want to do this demonstration as quickly as possible, we're going to stick with the default VPC for now. The general purpose bucket that we're creating the file system for is BB accounts. In this example, I'm going to go down and click on create file system. Now this is going to create the file system for you. It is going to take a few minutes. So I'm going to pause the video over here and come back once it's all done. Okay, so that's the file system now created. And as you can see, the file system is all set up and running. One thing to note, however, is that when you use the AWS Management Console to create the file system, it actually creates the IAM role for you so that S3 files can talk to the S3 bucket. Now, if you're using the command line interface, the thing to be aware of is that you need to create this IAM role as a prerequisite. I've got a link in the description box below that gives you a full guide to do that. Also, it creates the necessary mount targets across the different availability zones in the region in the VPC that you're going to be putting this file system in, as well as an access point for your application entry point, especially if you're using things like Lambda. So this is the file system all ready to go. We can now proceed to the next step, which is to basically launch an EC2 instance in the default VPC. We're going to be using that EC2 instance to connect to this file system so that we can access and interact with the S3 objects using standard file operations. So let's do that next. Okay, so I'm back on my AWS Management Console and we're going to be launching an EC2 instance next. Now, before we do that, we also need an IAM role that's going to be used as an instance profile for the EC2 instance so that it can connect to the S3 service as well. In addition to that, there is also an inline policy that you will need to add as part of that IAM role. So I want to take you into the IAM section next. Let's open that up in another tab. And we're going to create a role specifically for this EC2 instance. So I'm going to click on roles, click on create a role, and the service we're going to be working with is EC2. Now, if you have this EC2 instance in a private subnet, you probably want to use the EC2 role for System Manager because that's going to add a set of permissions that allows you to use Session Manager to connect to that EC2 instance. I don't need to do that for this particular demonstration because our EC2 instance is in the public subnet and we'll be using EC2 Connect to basically connect to the instance. So just leave it at EC2 for now. Go ahead and click Next. Now, there are a couple of permissions you need to add here for the EC2 instance. And the first one is Amazon S3 full access. Now, to be honest, this is a bit broad, so you can restrict it further. I just want to keep the lab as quick and simple as possible. So you need the Amazon S3 full access permissions, and you also need the Amazon Elastic File System utils. So let's just paste that in there. So we'll take that one as well. Going to click Next, and I'm going to give this role a name. I'm going to call this one BB Accounts EC2 role, just so that I know exactly what it is, which project it refers to, and click create a role. So the role has now been created, which is just down here, BB Accounts EC2 role. Okay, and the next thing that we need to do is add an inline permission. Now, I have got for you a policy. Again, it's available to you as a link in the description box below to our GitHub repository. So this file is available to you in our GitHub repository that allows you to follow on through. So we're going to have to install the Amazon EFS utils. We'll do that shortly, but this is the policy, the inline policy that we actually need in order for this all to work. So I'm going to copy this across, go back to the AWS Management Console, okay, and click Add Permissions, Create Inline Policy, JSON tab, remove the template and add my policy in there. Now this policy needs to be updated. You need to put the bucket name in there. So let's just go back to S3 and we'll go back to the actual bucket name. So that's BB Accounts. Just going to copy that and paste that in there. So it's the BB Accounts bucket and do the same there as well. Okay, so we're specifically looking for object read access, get object version, as well as the ability to list the bucket when we want to perform standard read operations. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Okay, and we need a policy name. So I'm going to call this one BB Accounts EC2 policy, something like that. and then click create policy. So now my BB accounts EC2 role, which will be used as an instance profile for the EC2 instance, has got 3 policies: Amazon Elastic File System utils, Amazon S3 files full access, and our custom inline policy. Okay, so that's done. Next step, let's go and launch our EC2 instance. Okay, so we're going to go into our EC2 management console, and we're going to launch an EC2 instance. Make sure you're in the same region, so that's the North Virginia region. And I'm going to launch without going through a walkthrough. I'm going to call this one BB accounts EC2 instance. Okay, so we know exactly what it is. It's going to be a Linux server 2023 kernel 6.1 AMI, instance type T3 micro. No need for key pairs because we're going to use the EC2 Connect service. When it comes to the network settings, make sure that you are in the default VPC because that's where the mount points are. And we're going to create a security group just for this on the fly to allow SSH access so that we can connect to it from the internet. Scroll a bit further down and click on the advanced details. And here you want to select under IAM instance profile, the role that we just created. So that was the BB accounts EC2 role. Okay. Go all the way to the bottom, nothing else to do. Click launch instance. Okay. And that's going to launch your instance for you. This is going to take a couple of minutes. So I'm going to pause the video here, come back once it's all done. Okay. So it's been a couple of minutes. So if we go to instances, our EC2 instances would be launched and all of our checks have been passed as well. So that's brilliant. Now, there's one more thing that we need to do, and that's to do with security groups. You remember this particular instance is associated with the Launch Wizard security group, which allows us to connect to it from the internet over port 22. However, if we go back to the file system, so let's go back to the file system. There it is over there. Okay, and we go to the mount targets. You will see that the mount targets themselves are also associated with the security group. Now, by default, it's associated with the default security group. So let's just open that up very quickly. Okay, so we're in the default VPC, but in the default VPC, we have 2 security groups. We've got the default security group. There it is there. And we've got our EC2 instance security group as well. So if I go down to security groups, there's the default security group, right? Which is accepting all traffic from itself. Okay. So the file system and the mount points can talk to themselves. However, it's not accepting traffic from our Launch Wizard security group, which our EC2 instance is associated with. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to just update this default security group. Ignore that last one that you're looking at, my VPC. That's a security group for a different project. I'm going to go to the default VPC security group, click edit, and add a new rule. And this time I'm going to add the NFS protocol. So that's port number 2049. And that needs to come from the Launch Wizard security group, which is associated with our EC2 instance. Okay, and then save rules. This is going to allow the traffic to go from the EC2 instances to those mount points. That's basically what we're trying to achieve here. So the next step now is really to attach the file system to our EC2 instance. Let's do that next. Okay, so the next step is to actually attach the file system to our EC2 instance. So if we go to the file system, there's actually a really quick and easy way to do this. Now you could do this all in the command line, obviously, but I just want to quickly show you how this works. When you click on the file system, so that's the file system there, there's an option to attach a compute resource, EC2 instance, Lambda function, ECS task, that kind of thing. So if you click attach to the EC2 instance, you need to select the EC2 instance that you want to attach to. So here I'm attaching it to BB account EC2 instance. That's going to be the local mount point, mnt/s3 files. In this example, obviously you can change that. And there are some step-by-step guides here to help you work through the process. Now, this suggests you use a Cloud Shell, but here you will need the key pairs. We don't need to do any of that. Instead, what we can do is we can go and connect to our EC2 instance itself and run the remaining commands a little later on in this list directly from the instance itself. So I'm going to go into the instance and connect to it. And I'm going to use the EC2 Instance Connect service. Click Connect. And I'm just going to elevate my privileges on the actual instance. So there it is. So there's my instance. I'm logged in. I've got root credentials in there. Okay, so we're going to go through this process. So ignore step 4, step 5. what we want to do is step 6, right? We want to actually install the EFS utils. So let's do that first. Let that run through. Okay, so that's taken care of that. The next thing that we want to do very quickly is we want to create that folder. So mnt s3 files, remember that's going to be our mount point. So we'll make a directory for that one. So that's done. Then we're going to mount the actual file system to that mount point. Okay, so paste that in there. And this might take a few seconds to actually happen. So just bear with it. And there it is. That's done. Okay, so I just cleared the screen over there very quickly. What I want to do is I want to verify that the file system was mounted successfully. So I'm going to copy that command, ls mnt s3 files, and you can see I can actually list it. So I can navigate into it. So mnt s3 files and press enter, and now I'm in that folder, which is a mount point to the Amazon S3 bucket. So I can create a file. Okay, my first doc.txt, okay, something like that, and I can say hello world, okay, and Control X, Y, and enter, right? And I can ls, and you will see that my file is created in that mount point. Now I've just written a file to that mount point, and it's going to take a few seconds to synchronize with the S3 bucket. Whilst that is happening, I can actually go to the S3 bucket. So let's go general purpose BB accounts. Okay, let's upload a file here very quickly. Okay, so I'm going to click upload, and I'm going to drag and drop a file into there. Okay, and I'm actually going to just drag and drop the slides that I presented in this video there. So there it is, and upload that. Okay, and as you can see, that's a 1.2 megabyte file. So that's more than the default 128 KB I was telling you about earlier. Okay, so now if I go to my EC2 instance and I do an ls again, you can see that my file is showing up. Okay, and if I go back to the S3 console and just go into BB accounts, you will see that my S3 files is there, but also my first doc text has synchronized and been written to the bucket. So I can actually click on that, click download, and open that up separately on my local machine. And there it is. Hello world. And that's pretty much the end of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Amazon S3 Files has been a true game changer, and it's definitely going to help all of you developers out there. Okay, before I end this video, I'd like to let you know that I have a project-based training program for the AWS Certified Solutions Architect SAA-C03 course. Now, this program is a project-based training solution that allows you to build hands-on experience as well as prepare for the AWS Solutions Architect exam. So in addition to, studying for the exam, doing all of the labs, going through all of the theory, you're going to actually complete 3 real-world AWS projects: a multi-tier, auto-scaling, auto-load balancing architecture, a containerized application stack, and a serverless architecture, all 3 of which are really important if you're looking to get in that role as a solutions architect. These are end-to-end projects designed specifically for this training program to help you gain real-world practical hands-on experience. The link of which is available to you in our description box below, or you can just visit us at the iasacademy.com. And if you use the code education, you can get 20% off the checkout price. I'll see you folks in the next video. Thank you.